speak now to Sean Blackmon. He is the organiser of the Stop Police Terror Project, DC, an organisation committed to changing racist systems and militarised law enforcement in Washington, DC. Fantastic to have you on the programme. First of all, what do these monuments mean to you?
Well, what I think your audience really should know is that a lot of these monuments, they weren't erected, around the time after the Civil War, or anything like that. A lot of them really began to be erected in the Jim Crow era in the United States in the 40s and 50s and 60s, really as a symbol, really of reconquest of white supremacy as part of a visual attempt, as part and parcel of a systemic attempt to really return Black people in this country to a status of slavery in everything but name. That has really always been their function, and people who feel so strongly about their presence and that they should be there. I mean, to be frank, these are people who want to see these symbol of racism still stand. And in truth, this notion that tearing them down somehow erases them from history is a complete farce. I mean, they could be put into a museum, they could be put in a number of places. But as people have pointed out before, there's a reason that when you go to Germany, you don't see any statues to Adolf Hitler. When you have these genocidal, bigoted, racist, parts of your history and people who represented that, people who represent the worst of your country's history, you don't glorify it by erecting monuments to them. And so, as people continue to be in the streets calling for an end of racist police terror and for an end to white supremacy in all its systemic forms, I think it's only natural that we also seeing the tearing down of those same systems in this physical form in terms of these monuments.
Okay, Sean, and that is my next question. So you have been in these protests. What are you and other protesters calling for right now, 2 weeks on from George Floyd's killing?
Well, it's interesting because we're at a point now where, George Floyd has had his funeral in Houston, Texas. The cop that killed him, Derek Chauvin, had his charges upgraded from third-degree murder to second-degree murder. The other three officers who stood by and watched him die have now been charged. But people are still in the streets. And the broader context to all of this is how the U.S. government abandoned its people under the coronavirus. We have 40 or 50 some odd million people unemployed, people cast into housing and job insecurity in a matter of a few weeks. Meanwhile, the Democrats and Republicans, the two ruling parties in the US, have sought fit to bail out Wall Street and the bankers and the billionaires. And so when you have a combination of material conditions in the United States becoming much more difficult, not because this country can't support us, but because it refuses to, along with the ongoing issues of racist police terror, it creates a perfect storm for resistance. And so now, as people continue to be in the streets and they have not been cowed by the vicious police repression ordered by Donald Trump and facilitated by city and state governments, we're not only calling for justice for George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Tony McDade and Sean Reed and others, but we're calling justice for those of us who are yet living. Because both the abandonment of the U.S. people under the coronavirus and the racist police terror, from my perspective, both emanate from the system of capitalism. So it's the contradictions of capitalism that have the American people in the situation where we are. I would say that is really continuing to fuel the demonstrations we see in the streets. And I think as time goes on, we'll continue to see people organize to that end.
And a question on the organisation that you founded, I believe, Stop Police Terror Project in DC. It says we do not believe the police can be reformed. Tell us more about this, and how do you feel about what is the discussions that are taking place right now around police reform?
Well, this is a good question. And the reason we say why the police can't be reformed is because the police in the United States literally has its roots in slavery, in the slave patrols here in the United States, who were tasked with surveilling and tracking and repressing African people who, of course, were first forced into servitude after being kidnapped from Africa. So their role in a white supremacist and capitalist system has always been racist by its nature. and has also been to protect property, which is why we see all this moralizing on so-called looting and so-called rioting. It's because people, in this system value property over human life. And so, I think this is a part of the frustration that people are really feeling. And so, understanding that the police then cannot be reformed, we have to ask the question, well, what then can be done to ensure that they're not in a position to continue this abuse, to continue these killings, to continue this terror? Well, two main things I can say one main thing that we're hearing a lot across the nation now is defunding the police. And a lot of ruling class officials are pretending that, their minds are blown by this concept and they don't know what it means. From the standpoint of Stop Police Terror Project DC, the DC Police Department has a budget of $500 million. And if our mayor, Muriel Bowser, has it her way, they'll get $20 million more. And all this does is further empower the police to terrorize DC's Black communities and other poor working and oppressed communities. So we feel that instead of continuing to just dump that money and waste it on,
Sorry, I wanted to say we're running out of time, but you bring up so many interesting points, Sean. Thanks so much for coming on the program. Sorry to have interrupted you there, Sean Blackmon.